Greetings from LA, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journey, our discussions, our discoveries, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2023, and that brings us to a set, which is a collector set, which has been given the spine number collectively 1186, and it is this set, which is the RANOWN Westerns, 5 films directed by Budd Boetticher, starring Randolph Scott. And this has a number of films contained within it. It's a really great set. And one of the films is what I'd like to focus on today, if that's okay. And it is a really rich work. This is a work which is, again, this is directed by Budd Boetticher, and it is described as being from the year 1958. And the name of the work is Buchanan Rides Alone. This is the work which is described as being from the year 1958, and it stars Randolph Scott and Craig Stevens and others in this film, which is produced by Harry Jo Brown with associate producer Randolph Scott, and screenplay which is credited to Charles Lang, and this is directed by Budd Boetticher. And we have this film, which is Buchanan Rides Alone. And it comes to us this year courtesy of the Criterion Collection 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo edition, and this is on disc number 2, or 4K UHD disc number 2, with another Blu-ray as well, alternative Blu-ray, which we'll talk a little bit about later in this video. But here we have Buchanan Rides Alone, which is part of this series, or it's known in this cycle known as the RANOWN Westerns. And I'm reminded, of course, that technically speaking, this film is, according to its credits and its production history, it's part of what's known as Scott Brown production. The actual terminology of RANOWN will come a little bit later, as is pointed out by some of the great supplements and some of the great commentary materials that form part of this box set with regard to some of the other films. But in terms of the pedigree and the production values in history and the performers and artists involved, this is now regarded as a quote-unquote RANOWN Western, which is part of the reason why we see it included in a number of sets that we have seen over the course of many years, and the Criterion Collection set right now is the latest of such installments. And so Buchanan Rides Alone, this is a very kind of fun and quirky quote-unquote RANOWN Western. On the one hand, we have a type of loner hero, protagonist type in the form of Randolph Scott's Buchanan, Tom Buchanan, who rides into town, which I think now watching the so-called RANOWN Westerns up to now in the order that they appear in the set, we come to realize this is one of the ways in which these films seem to be introducing the landscape and the Western landscape, and also the figure of the quote-unquote lone hero. And what's interesting off the bat is we have a hero in the form of Buchanan who seems to, at least at first blush, to be very far removed from the quote-unquote brooding heroes that we might have seen in other RANOWN Westerns. And in fact, we notice that there is an extra pep in his step. There is a type of twinkle in the eye. There is a sort of wry smile. And there's almost a joyousness, for lack of a better phrase, that seems to be accompanying or being part of the spirit of Buchanan, which is part of the charm and indeed one of the great, quirky aspects of this film, Buchanan Rides Alone. When he comes into this town, we realize that there is already off the bat some kind of maybe a hidden or maybe not so hidden sense of corruption and corruptibility in this sort of outpost town area. And the family of Agri in this place, Agri Town, where almost all the stores seem to be named Agri in one form or another, and that's because we understand that there is this family of Agris that have their quote unquote fingers in the proverbial pies, so to speak, which also leads to a sense of almost an ironclad control over the community and pretty much the opinions and the ebbs and flows of this community and this town, including a type of, say, power and authority, which also spills over into how justice is meted out, or perhaps maybe injustice is meted out. And not only that, we have the sense of sort of echelons of power and authority, political rises and falls. And then within the mix here, we have rivalries that emerge almost at a petty level, but even these petty, almost ne'er-do-well, mundane reasons for starting these petty rivalries sometimes end up really deadly. There are sometimes gunfights and shootouts that lead to very deadly consequences. And we have Tom Buchanan thrown into the mix through sort of a tumult of circumstances that may or may not be because of his own doing. And therein lies, I guess, the catapult, if you will, into sort of the maze, if you will, of the ins and outs of this Western, which I think has been described in many circles as being, on the one hand, a very out-and-out RANOWN Western. It's also been described as having a maybe comic touch that is also touching upon areas of, say, race and race relations, justice and injustice, the gray area or the complexities of quote-unquote villains. Much like other RANOWN Westerns, we have this town of Agri who seem to be occupied with these quote-unquote villains or antagonists, but they have their own cloaks of nuance, which may lead to the potential for maybe some kind of examination of psychological profiles, or at the very least, maybe an establishment through the form or the cinematic form as to some kind of possible understanding as to why the motives of certain antagonistic characters play out the way they do. And we've seen this a lot in many forms in the RANOWN Westerns up to now, heroes and villains, but there is a lot of gray area, and perhaps there is more psychological complex continuity between the two sides than meets the eye, thus making for, I think, very compelling drama. Well, I think in that sense, Buchanan Rides Alone has that sense of style. There's also double cross and triple cross, and new characters emerge, and then suddenly the plot is the plot thickens, the script is flipped, and things then layer on to more sort of mayhem and action. And that's another thing too that Budd Boetticher and company do really well, is setting up types of action scenes that are always loaded with a sense of, say, psychological burden, as well as really well-defined stakes. The geography is well established, as well as the motivations of the characters that are involved in these action set pieces are always well established. And you throw into the mix there the great performance, as per usual, by Randolph Scott as Tom Buchanan, which is, on the one hand, a very Randolph Scott figure, of course, played by Randolph Scott, carrying that wonderful charisma and on-screen presence, the rugged nature that has rock solid morality on the one hand, but on the other hand, what's interesting too is the way in this character is established, and the fact that he may or may not have a type of, say, a quote-unquote dark backstory, end quote. I mean, that's one of the interesting things about how this film, Buchanan Rides Alone, is connected to and indeed set off or different from some of the other RANOWN Westerns. Is one of the ways is how the main character, is established, and whether the main character that is established here has a kind of a brooding past, seeking out vengeance, or perhaps he is just through carrying himself on through the happenstance of luck and chance and goodwill. Again, always with a twinkle in the eye and the curl of the lip to indicate a wry smile and a type of cheeky understanding of what's going on, while still being part of the proceedings. And or it could be a hybrid of the two. One, again, it's up to you to find out when you watch the film Buchanan Rides Alone. But in any event, you are in for, I think, another great example of, say, the layering on of type of psychological burden, and or a very interesting mix of set pieces that I think are very easy to understand and easy to follow, and very well paced within its quite compact and extremely economical running time. And this is a film that doesn't lag. It has slow beats and it has upbeats, that's for sure. But the slow beats, I think, provide us a sense of type of exchange of rhythm, and also getting to know our characters, getting to know the situations, which creates even more dramatic intrigue and high stakes when things really start to increase in tension and suspense, and the stakes are rising even more. To the point of being heavily involved as we reach our climax of the film. So this film, Buchanan Rides Alone, is another great example of the RANOWN Western tradition, again in the form of the Scott Brown production with Budd Boetticher at the helm as director. So Buchanan Rides Alone, what another great example of the RANOWN Westerns, directed by Budd Boetticher, starring Randolph Scott. Buchanan Rides Alone is part of this set, which is the RANOWN Westerns, 5 films directed by Budd Boetticher, starring Randolph Scott. And as I indicated here, you could find it on the second 4K UHD disc, or you can find it on the first Blu-ray disc. So once again, this is a 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo edition, so you'll have the 4K UHD discs plus the Blu-ray discs. So depending on which disc you're talking about, that's where you'll find Buchanan Rides Alone, either on the 4K UHD or the Blu-ray alternative. So it's your choice. But they are relying on this presentation here, and according to the notes that are found in the booklet here about the masters on page this is page 31, it says about Buchanan Rides Alone, and I quote, Buchanan Rides Alone is presented in its original aspect ratio of 1.85 to 1. It was restored in 4K by Sony Pictures Entertainment. Scanning and digital restoration were completed by Cineric from the 35mm original camera negative. HDR color grading was completed by colorist David Bernstein at Roundabout Entertainment in Santa Monica, California. The monaural audio restoration and conform were conducted at Blue Wave Audio from the 35mm original DME magnetic tracks. The restoration was supervised by Grover Crisp for Sony Pictures Entertainment. So, again, this is a film that I've never had the opportunity or good fortune to have seen in the theater, unfortunately. But I have seen it a number of times on a number of maybe previous physical media releases. And now the Criterion Collection releases the latest of those, of that great history of this film appearing here and there on physical media. But this is a film that has a very rich, as they all do. This one has it has a richness of tapestry and color, and there's a way in which this presentation for me feels very ripe and kind of vibrant. And while of course I do notice this idea of the sense of kind of a digitized way in which this is presented, it never once distracted me. It never took me out of my being enthralled in the piece. And so I felt like this was a world that was a Western world, a Budd Boetticher Western world that was rich and alive, and with vibrant colors and textures, which is again matching the type of richness and the type of web of complexity of the rich and textured characters, as it were, from a way of speaking about it. And so the look and sound of this to my eyes and to my ears were really amazing. And so I was very pleased with how this was and how this appeared. Not to say that I was never displeased with how it looked before in, say, non-Criterion releases, but here for me this was really tops. So I was very happy with how this looks on the Criterion release, again for the 4K UHD disc or with the Blu-ray disc, which is what I have here as an example. And next up, let's speak about the supplements that can be found accompanying this film, Buchanan Rides Alone. So once again, Buchanan Rides Alone can be found on either the 4K UHD disc or the Blu-ray disc. But when you're talking about the supplements, you're going to go to the Blu-ray disc. So that's what I have here. Now, we should point out that Buchanan Rides Alone does not have a commentary track option. So that would have been nice to see, a commentary track. But alas, that's not the case for this film. But that's okay because we do have, again, we're going to talk about a number of supplements that are found on the supplement-specific disc. That's also part of the set. We'll talk about that in a separate video. But for now, let's speak about what the supplements that are linked specifically to Buchanan Rides Alone on the Blu-ray are, because again, you'll find the supplements to Buchanan Rides Alone as part of the Blu-ray, not the 4K UHD disc, but the Blu-ray, which is what I have here. Now, the first thing is an introduction by Taylor Hackford. And Taylor Hackford is, among many things, a great expert when it comes to the world of Budd Boetticher and the RANOWN Westerns and Randolph Scott and company. So he is a great scholar and a passionate fan and admirer of these works. And it's great to have his comments yet again. And this is approximately 9 minutes. I do love his, because I always have to, because I'm not at all an expert when it comes to the RANOWN Westerns, but so when I watch the great supplements, such as Taylor Hackford's introductions here for this film as an example, I'm reminded, again, he reminds me about how this is, quote unquote, not officially a quote unquote RANOWN Western because, again, of its sort of production history and how it's a Scott Brown production. You know, the word RANOWN will come a little bit later in some of the later films. But for all intents and purposes, yes, and how they are regarded throughout the course of cinema history and Budd Boetticher's filmography, and Harry and the producer Brown and Randolph Scott, etc., Harry Joe Brown and Randolph Scott, etc. This is, of course, considered a quote unquote RANOWN Western, and even that has a sort of official, official status and non-official status as well. Which is an interesting concept and approach. But in any event, Taylor Hackford does remind us of this. But it is in spirit and also in terms of the cinema history of Budd Boetticher's filmography, a RANOWN Western. And he does speak about the writing expertise and also the relationships between the writers and the filmmakers and directors and producers. So this is mentioning also Charles Lang Jr., but also Burt Kennedy as well, and his work in the context of the RANOWN Westerns overall. But also, what's so great here is, again, Taylor Hackford mentions how this is a film that is very much in keeping with the other Budd Boetticher films, but also not quite the same ethos, which is a great phrase I think Taylor Hackford brings up, because that's meant to evoke or describe a sense of how unique this film, Buchanan Rides Alone, sits within the canon of the RANOWN Westerns. And a great example of this is how the Randolph Scott character is portrayed. Now, I don't want to get into too many details about this, again, for the benefit of those who have not yet seen this great film, but there is a possible way that one might look at the Randolph Scott character in this film and see how his character is similar but also very distinct and different from, say, the other characters that Randolph Scott plays in the other RANOWN Western films. The phrase here is kind of sympathetic anti-hero as well. And so while there might be some distinctions, there are also some similarities too that Taylor Hackford reminds us of in how the anti-heroes or the quote-unquote villains or the antagonists of the piece are created. You know, much like other RANOWN Westerns, we have antagonists or villains that still have a kind of code of honor and a type of morality of sorts. even if they might be on the other side of the sort of the hero-villain compass in the stakes of the RANOWN Western, as it were. So Craig Stevens here is mentioned, I think, in a really great role. It's a very it has a type of meaty performance. And also, there is a sense here too of what Taylor Hackford refers to as a quote-unquote thinking person's Western, and I think that's meant to suggest how it has many layers. I mean, it is an action-adventure film. It is a Western film with the environments and trappings and the sort of genre expectations that brings with it. But there are also these ways in which we look at people. And Craig Stevens' portrayal is an example, Randall Scott's portrayal is an example, and we look at other films which also provide their own examples, but how we look at things in a very three-dimensional way. And we look at things, and while we're watching this film, depending on what scene we watch, our sympathies may shift. A character that we might have loathed 1 minute, we might really sympathize with in a separate scene another minute, and that's because maybe the character dynamics shift, or maybe we are privy to some new information about the motivations, the motivations behind the character that we weren't privy to, say, prior to this. So I think that's an example of the great way in which everything is balanced so well, and things can shift and turn on a dime, but still command our interest and create a sense of the organic flow of this and other the RANOWN Westerns. So this is great for this and many other reasons. Again, Taylor Hackford's introduction here is really quite wonderful. I mean, it says an introduction. I would probably recommend watching it after you've seen Buchanan Rides Alone. Because or you can watch it and then watch the introduction many times and then watch some of the supplements and come back to the introduction if you like. I think that is a good way to approach it. But in any event, we have a wonderful introduction here by Taylor Hackford as one of the supplements. And then the second supplement here, as you can see, or as maybe you can't see because of my poor presentation skills, I apologize, it's a bit out of focus, but the second of the two supplements listed here is the trailer. So you get the trailer and you get the introduction. So as far as what we have linked here, that's it as far as Buchanan Rides Alone specific supplements on the Blu-ray. It might seem a little bit low in quantity on paper, but we do have another supplement specific disc that we will talk about in a subsequent video. But in any event, what we do get here is wonderful. No commentary, unfortunately. That would have been great if we could have gotten a commentary, that's for sure. But in any event, we have this wonderful further embellishment of the world of the RANOWN Westerns, or the journey of the RANOWN Westerns, again, the context of Buchanan Rides Alone. And then let us speak very, very briefly about this booklet, the staple booklet here, which I've taken the liberty of removing from this packaging. We will talk about the packaging and the disc arrangement and the artwork and also the comprehensive writings that are part of this and the layout. It's a really great layout. It's a really great booklet, by the way, and the comprehensive essays are wonderful. I should point out that on a couple of the pages, I want to say 8 and 9, yes, we have this, which is the Buchanan Rides Alone specific pages. And so on this side, we have a write-up or synopsis or plot synopsis of this with information about the year and the running time and the aspect ratio. This is 1.85 to 1, by the way, monaural. And then on the other side, we have a list of cast and credits and other information with some still photographs as well to centralize the layout here. So. And I like the green color as well. So I do like the use of the colors here and the various menus from Blu-ray disc to 4K UHD disc to the booklet as well. So in any event, we do have Buchanan Rides Alone. It's not maybe a critical analytical essay per se, but it's still a good write-up, and we do have other writings as well that we will talk about later as part of this wonderful set in this wonderful booklet. So. Let us conclude for now our discussions of the RANOWN Westerns, and we will put a pause here, but again, we will pick up this when we speak about the next film, which is another great one, Ride Lonesome, and that'll be in the next video in this series. But this has been a quick discussion about Buchanan Rides Alone. Again, another great stop along the way on your journey through the works of the RANOWN Westerns. It's a great place to stop. much like Buchanan does. One of the great stops along the way. Buchanan rides alone, or does he, when we, of course, join him along for the ride. So in any event, Buchanan rides alone as part of this set. The RANOWN Westerns, 5 films directed by Budd Boetticher, starring Randolph Scott. All right, my dear friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great movies, including Buchanan Rides Alone, including other films in the RANOWN Western cycle and beyond. And so until the next video, my dear friends, stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.